For most people, Christmas is the most joyful time of the year, a season of warmth, laughter, and family traditions. But for me, Christmas has always carried a quiet ache, a shadow that clings to every string of twinkling lights and every carol drifting through the air. It wasn't the holiday itself that I dreaded, but the way it always unfolded in my parents' house. Each December, I knew I'd walk through the door only to be met with the same piercing words, "Emily, you've always been such a disappointment." It wasn't just the words themselves, but the way my mother delivered them, with a sharpness disguised as humor, as if tearing me down was part of the holiday entertainment. My siblings, Mark, the golden boy with his high-paying corporate job, and Lily, the adored daughter with her growing family, always seemed to shine in her eyes. I, on the other hand, was the dim star in the corner, never bright enough to belong in her constellation. I could still recall last Christmas vividly. The tree had been decked in glittering ornaments, the dining table heavy with turkey and pies, and my mother had raised her glass for a toast. She praised Mark for buying his first vacation home, gushed about Lily's third pregnancy, and then turned her gaze to me. Her lips curled into a smile that wasn't really a smile at all. "And Emily," she had said, pausing dramatically, still no ring on her finger, no baby in her arms. "But at least she brought wine this year. We can count that as progress, can't we?" The room erupted in laughter. My siblings chuckled awkwardly, the in-laws avoided my eyes, and I felt the heat of humiliation crawling up my neck. I had smiled weakly, pretending to be in on the joke, but inside, the words carved wounds that had yet to heal. That had been the pattern for as long as I could remember. It wasn't as though I had nothing to be proud of. I had built a stable career, working in nonprofit management, helping communities and causes that mattered deeply to me. My apartment, though modest, was my sanctuary, filled with books, plants, and the quiet independence I cherished. I had friendships that were genuine and a heart that, though bruised, still believed in love. But none of that seemed to matter in my mother's eyes. To her, the measure of a woman's worth was still tied to a man's last name and the pitter-patter of little feet. And because I didn't fit into that mold, I was treated as though I had failed. As this year's Christmas approached, I felt the familiar tension knotting in my chest. The streets outside sparkled with holiday cheer shop windows, glowing, children clutching candy canes, couples ice skating hand in hand, but I carried a different kind of anticipation, one heavy with dread. The thought of stepping back into that house, of enduring the same barbed remarks, made me want to avoid the holiday altogether. But obligation, guilt, and the fragile hope that maybe this year would be different pulled me back. Every December, I told myself I wouldn't let her words get to me, that I was strong enough, mature enough, to brush off the cruel jokes and smile through the dinner. But when it came down to it, I always left feeling smaller than when I'd arrived. As though the twinkling lights had dimmed around me and the laughter had echoed only at my expense this year. However, something stirred inside me. Perhaps it was exhaustion from years of biting my tongue, or maybe a quiet resolve that had been building unnoticed. As I packed my bag for the trip to my parents' house, I whispered to myself, "This will be the last Christmas I let her break me." Of course, I had no idea just how true those words would become, or that this Christmas would change everything in ways I couldn't have imagined. The drive to my parents' house was short, but it always felt unbearably long. My car radio hummed softly with Christmas songs, cheerful voices singing of love, joy, and homecomings. Yet instead of warmth, each lyric seemed to taunt me, reminding me of the version of Christmas I longed for, but never had. The closer I got to the familiar neighborhood, the tighter my grip became on the steering wheel. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house glittered in the pale winter sun. My mother's touch was everywhere, golden wreaths on the windows, a pair of toy soldiers guarding the front porch, and a massive inflatable Santa waving from the yard. It looked like something out of a holiday magazine, perfectly curated and inviting. But I knew that behind the sparkling decorations, the atmosphere would be far less welcoming. The moment I stepped through the door, a wave of laughter and chatter washed over me. The living room was alive with noise, nieces and nephews tearing into early gifts, My brother Mark holding a glass of red wine as he bragged about his latest promotion, and my sister Lily balancing her newborn on one hip while her other two kids clung to her legs. The scent of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and pine needles filled the air, wrapping the house in the unmistakable scent of Christmas. "Emily." My mother called from the kitchen, her voice high and sharp, as if surprised I'd actually shown up. She emerged carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres, her hair perfectly curled, her sweater sparkling with sequins. She looked me over quickly, her eyes flicking down to my hand searching, as always, for the ring that wasn't there. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she said, "Well, at least you're on time this year." I forced a polite smile. "Merry Christmas, Mom." The words felt stiff, rehearsed. I wanted to believe them, but the air in the room already felt heavy, like the quiet before a storm. Mark waved from across the room. "Hey, Sissa. Grab a drink, join us?" His voice was warm, but there was a subtle undertone, as if he were trying to defuse the tension before it started. Lily gave me a quick hug, distracted by her toddler tugging at her sleeve. They meant well, I knew, but neither of them ever stepped between me and Mom's barbs. They had their own places in the family hierarchy. Why risk it by defending the one who'd always been branded as the failure? I slipped into a chair by the fireplace, watching as the family interacted with an ease I couldn't match. My mother cooed over Lily's baby, praising her endlessly for being such a wonderful mother. She admired Mark's new Rolex, a gift from his company, gushing about how proud she was of him. Then, as if on cue, her gaze shifted toward me. "You know, Emily," she said loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "your cousin Sarah just got engaged. She's 2 years younger than you. Isn't that something?" A few chuckles rippled through the room. I clenched my jaw, nodding politely, though my stomach tightened like a fist. I had expected this. It was tradition, after all. My mother's annual reminder that, in her eyes, I lagged behind everyone else. I tried to distract myself with the twinkling lights on the tree. Each ornament reflected tiny fragments of the room, children laughing, Mark's glass clinking with another, Lily rocking her baby. To anyone else, the scene might have looked picture-perfect. To me, it was a performance, and I was always cast as the failure in the background. Dinner would be served soon, and I knew what awaited me there, more jokes at my expense. Another toast dripping with backhanded compliments. I swallowed hard, telling myself once again to endure it, to get through the night without breaking, but deep down, something in me whispered that I couldn't keep doing this. Not again. Not another Christmas. And little did I know, the night's events would soon push me to a breaking point, one that would change everything forever. Dinner was announced with the kind of fanfare my mother adored. She swept into the dining room carrying the turkey as though she were presenting a crown jewel, her sequin sweater shimmering in the candlelight. The long table was already laden with dishes: mashed potatoes whipped smooth, glistening cranberry sauce, green bean casserole topped with crispy onions. It looked like a scene from a holiday movie. But for me, the food was only a distraction. A small reprieve before the inevitable. I took my seat at the far end of the table, opposite my mother. She always arranged the seating herself, and I suspected she placed me there deliberately, as if to keep me under her gaze for the entire meal. Mark sat proudly next to Dad, regaling him with stories of business trips and lucrative deals. Lily bounced her baby on her lap, smiling as her husband cut her food for her. The children squirmed in their chairs, their excitement filling the gaps between conversations. At first, the meal was tolerable. We made small talk about the weather, about the unusually heavy snowfall that had blanketed the neighborhood, about the children's gifts. I even allowed myself a fleeting moment of relief. Maybe, just maybe, this year would pass without a spectacle, but it didn't take long. My mother raised her wine glass, tapping it lightly with her fork. The room hushed instantly, all eyes on her. She loved this part, holding the spotlight, commanding the attention of every person at the table. "I just want to take a moment," she began, her voice syrupy sweet, "to celebrate what a wonderful year it has been for this family." She turned to Mark first. "My darling son, what an incredible achievement, getting that big promotion and buying that new house. We are so proud of you." Mark smiled modestly, though his chest puffed a little. Thanks, Mom. Next, she turned to Lily. And my sweet Lily, you've given us the greatest blessing of all, another beautiful grandchild. You're such a devoted mother. We couldn't ask for more. Lily blushed, cradling her baby tighter. Her husband kissed her temple, and the table hummed with approving nods. Then came the pause. That cruel, deliberate pause. My stomach twisted as I felt her eyes lock on me. And then, she said, drawing the words out slowly, we have Emily. The silence was deafening. Even the children seemed to quiet, sensing what was coming. My mother's lips curled into that familiar, mocking smile. Still figuring life out, bless her heart? No husband, no children. But at least she's consistent. She chuckled at her own joke, sipping her wine as though she'd delivered a brilliant punchline. The table erupted in uneasy laughter. Mark let out a forced chuckle. Lily shifted uncomfortably, her eyes dropping to her plate. My father cleared his throat but said nothing, as always. The sound of their laughter echoed inside me, each chuckle a knife twisting deeper. I could feel the heat rising in my face, my throat tightening as though someone had placed a hand around it. My fork trembled in my hand, the mashed potatoes on my plate blurring through the tears that threatened to spill. I wanted to scream, to slam my fists on the table, to demand that they stop humiliating me. But years of swallowing my pride had trained me to stay silent. To shrink into myself, I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could find the words, the sharp chime of the doorbell cut through the tension. Everyone froze. The children glanced toward the hallway, curiosity lighting their faces. My mother frowned, clearly irritated. Who on earth could that be? She muttered, setting down her wine glass with a clink. The doorbell rang again. Echoing through the house, for the first time that evening, all eyes shifted away from me. I exhaled shakily, my heart pounding. Relief and dread tangled together. Whoever was at that door had just interrupted the cruel rhythm of the night, and though none of us knew it yet, that simple chime would mark the moment everything changed. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor filled the silence as everyone looked toward the front hallway. My mother, visibly annoyed at the disruption of her moment, stood and smoothed her sequin sweater. Honestly, she muttered, who visits unannounced on Christmas? The children bounced in their seats, whispering excitedly about Santa or presents, but the adults exchanged puzzled looks. No one had mentioned inviting anyone else. I felt a strange flutter in my chest, a mix of panic and anticipation. I already knew who it was before the door even opened. The door creaked. And there he was, Daniel. He stepped inside, brushing snow from his shoulders, his cheeks flushed pink from the cold. In his hands he carried a neatly wrapped gift, tied with a ribbon that shimmered under the entryway light. His dark eyes scanned the room until they found mine, and a small, reassuring smile spread across his face. "Merry Christmas," he said warmly. His voice steady but tinged with nervousness. The room went utterly silent. I felt my mother's eyes dart from him to me, her eyebrows arching in suspicion. "And who might this be?" she asked, her tone deceptively polite. Though I could already hear the edge creeping in, I swallowed hard, rising from my seat. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure the whole table could hear it. "This is Daniel," I said softly, forcing strength into my voice. "We've been seeing each other for a while. I invited him to join us for dinner." There it was. The secret I had held so close for the past year, spoken aloud in the one place I had least wanted to reveal it. Mark coughed into his napkin. Lily's eyes widened, and even Dad looked up from his plate in surprise. The children whispered excitedly. One of them giggled. "Aunt Emily brought a boyfriend." Daniel stepped further into the dining room, offering the gift to my mother. "Thank you for having me," he said sincerely. "I hope I'm not intruding. Emily speaks often about your Christmas dinners, and I didn't want her to come alone." My mother's lips tightened, though she accepted the gift out of sheer politeness. "How thoughtful," she murmured, setting it aside without looking at it. Her eyes flicked back to me, as if to say, "We'll discuss this later," but before she could regain her control of the evening, Daniel began talking to the others. He complimented the decor, praised the food, and leaned down to high-five one of the children who was staring at him with wide-eyed curiosity. Slowly, the atmosphere thawed. Mark was the first to engage. "So, Daniel," he said, his voice cautious but curious, "what do you do?" "I'm in architecture," Daniel replied with a modest smile. "I design community spaces, schools, parks. It's something I'm passionate about." Lily leaned in. That's incredible. Do you love it?" "I do," he said, glancing at me. "But what I really admire is what Emily does. The work she does in nonprofit management, it's inspiring. The way she gives so much of herself to help others." His voice trailed off, but the sincerity in his eyes said everything. The table went quiet again, but this time not with judgment. For the first time in years, I felt the shift. My siblings were looking at me differently, not as the overlooked single sister, but as someone worthy of admiration. I caught my mother's expression as she sipped her wine, her smile frozen, her eyes narrowed. She was losing control of the script she had written for me all these years, and for the first time at a Christmas dinner, I wasn't shrinking under her gaze. Instead, I was sitting taller, my shoulders back, my heart steady, because I wasn't alone anymore. As dinner resumed, I could feel the undercurrents swirling at the table. My mother was clearly unsettled. She didn't like surprises, least of all ones that shifted the spotlight away from her carefully curated narrative. For years, she had cast me as the family's disappointment, and now, with Daniel sitting beside me, her script no longer flowed as easily. Still, she wasn't going to give up without a fight. "So, Daniel," she said with a saccharine smile that never reached her eyes, "you've known Emily for—" "How long exactly?" Daniel dabbed politely at his mouth with his napkin. "Just over a year," he replied. "We met through a volunteer project. Emily was organizing a fundraising drive for a community center I had helped design." "How nice," my mother said, her tone flat. She swirled her wine glass, her gaze flicking back to me. "And you've managed to tolerate her this long?" She gave a little laugh, as though it were just a joke, but the barb was sharp enough to draw blood. Mark chuckled nervously. Lily frowned, and Dad busied himself with carving more turkey. I felt the familiar sting of humiliation rising in my chest. My instinct was to shrink, to retreat into silence. But before I could, Daniel's voice cut in. "I don't tolerate Emily," he said firmly. "I respect her. I admire her. She's one of the most driven, compassionate people I've ever met." The words hung in the air like a spark in a dry field. My mother blinked, her smile faltering. "Well," she said after a pause, "I suppose everyone has different standards." Daniel didn't flinch. He leaned forward slightly, his tone still calm but carrying a weight that couldn't be ignored. "It's not about standards. It's about values. Emily has built a life that matters. She works tirelessly to help others. She's loyal to her friends and family, and she carries herself with more grace than anyone I know. That's something worth being proud of." A hush fell over the table. Even the children, sensing the shift, stopped fidgeting and stared. My mother tried to laugh it off, but it sounded brittle. "You make her sound like some kind of saint." "You'll learn, Daniel, she's not as perfect as you think." I felt my heart pounding, every muscle in my body tense. Normally, I would have let the comment pass, burying the pain until I got home. But Daniel's presence, his unflinching defense, lit a fire in me I hadn't known I still carried. "No, Mom," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "You'll learn. You'll learn that I'm not your punchline. I've listened to your jokes and your insults every Christmas for years, and I've stayed quiet because I thought maybe if I just endured it, you'd stop. But you never did." The table was silent. Mark stared at me, stunned. Lily's eyes filled with tears. Dad set down the carving knife, his hands shaking slightly. My mother's face flushed crimson. "Emily, don't be so dramatic. We're just having a little fun." "No," I said, shaking my head. "You weren't having fun. You were tearing me down to make yourself feel better. And I let you, but not anymore." Daniel reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it gently. "That small touch gave me the strength to keep going. I'm proud of the life I've built," I continued. Maybe it doesn't look like what you wanted from me, but it's mine. And I'm done apologizing for it. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, but also strangely freeing. For the first time, I wasn't sitting at that table as the family's disappointment. I was sitting as myself, whole, worthy, unashamed. And for once, I wasn't standing alone. The silence that followed my words felt heavier than any snowfall outside. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the entire room had frozen in time, suspended in the glow of the candles and twinkling lights. My chest rose and fell quickly, adrenaline pulsing through me, but beneath it all was a strange, steady calm. For the first time in my life, I had spoken my truth aloud. It was Lily who broke the silence. "Emily," she said softly, her voice catching, "I'm so sorry. I should have stood up for you years ago." Her eyes shimmered with tears as she glanced at our mother. "She's right, Mom. You've been cruel." Mark cleared his throat uncomfortably, shifting in his seat. "Yeah," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. "We all laughed when we shouldn't have. I guess we thought it was easier than arguing with you." My father, usually a silent figure in these battles, finally spoke. His voice was low, weary, but resolute. "Your mother has a sharp tongue," he admitted. "But Emily, I'm proud of you. I always have been." The words startled me. He had never said that before, not once in all my years. My throat tightened, but this time it wasn't from humiliation. It was from relief. My mother sat stiffly, her sequined sweater sparkling under the chandelier, her jaw clenched. She opened her mouth, ready to retort, but Daniel spoke first. "Mrs. Harris," he said gently but firmly, "family gatherings should lift people up, not tear them down. Emily deserves love and respect, not ridicule. I hope someday you'll see her the way the rest of us do." My mother's eyes narrowed, but for once she had no quick comeback. She looked around the table, realizing she no longer had an audience. Her supporters, her children, her husband had turned away. The Queen of Christmas had lost her crown. The rest of the meal carried on, quieter than before. Conversations drifted toward the children's toys, the snowfall outside, holiday plans. But the sharp undercurrent of cruelty had vanished, replaced by something else, uneasy, yes, but also freer. When dessert was finished and coats were gathered, Daniel and I rose to leave. I hugged Lily tightly, feeling her arms linger as if to apologize again without words. Mark gave me an awkward pat on the shoulder, his expression softer than usual. My father kissed my forehead, something he hadn't done since I was a little girl. At the doorway, my mother stood stiff, her arms crossed. She didn't speak, didn't apologize, but she also didn't deliver one final jab. That, in itself, felt like a small victory. Outside, the snow was falling thick and quiet, blanketing the world in white. Daniel took my hand as we walked to the car, his fingers warm and steady against mine. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was fleeing Christmas. I felt like I was reclaiming it. As we drove away, the house shrinking in the rearview mirror, I leaned back in my seat, letting out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The Christmas lights blurred into soft streaks through the snowy glass, and I realized that, for once, they didn't sting. They glowed. Daniel glanced at me, his smile gentle. "You were amazing tonight." I smiled back, my heart swelling with something new, something I hadn't felt in years. Pride, not the kind my mother withheld, but the kind that comes from standing tall, from choosing yourself. This Christmas hadn't been perfect. It had been messy, painful, raw. But it was also the first one where I hadn't let myself be diminished. The first one where I had found my voice. The first one where I wasn't alone, and as the snowflakes swirled against the windshield, I realized something else. I wasn't a disappointment. I never had been. This Christmas had rewritten the story I've been forced to play out year after year. It was no longer about my mother's judgment or my siblings' silence. It was about me. About love. About freedom. And for the first time in my life, Christmas felt like mine.